Good day, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, my name is JD Burke. I work with Kiuwan, and we'll be presenting the webinar today using Kiuwan with Visual Studio. My name is JD Burke. I'm a really great guy and have a lot of experience doing a lot of cool stuff. You can read about me there in your spare time. We're planning on about 40 minutes of webinar. It's pretty short and quick, pretty easy to do what we're going to do today. So that's going to break down to about 30 minutes of presentation with about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. You don't have to wait for questions at the end. There is in webinar a questions panel. And if you click on that and type in your questions, we have folks standing by to try and answer those questions during the webinar. And then any questions that don't get answered, I'll cover at the end and go over any of the cool questions that came in during the talk. And then if we run out of time for whatever reason and can't get to your question, or you think of some really neat thing, just as we're closing down, go ahead and send those over or put them into the question panel, and then we'll respond to you via email. All right, the agenda for today. I'll tell you a little bit about us, about Kiuwan and IDE, a brief overview of Kiuwan the company, and then we'll jump right into the IDE plugin, which sometimes we refer to as Kiuwan for developers. And then I'll specifically call out the Visual Studio IDE plugin, and then go through installation of that plugin into Visual Studio Code on my Mac. And then I have a video where I installed it into Visual Studio on Windows to give you an idea. It's a very similar process, but of course, Mac and Windows are slightly different. So between those two, you should get a good idea of how to do that in Visual Studio. And then we'll circle back to our Q&A session where we field any of the questions that are outstanding. All right, so as promised, a little bit about us. My name is JD Burke. I work for Kiuwan. Kiuwan is a global company that provides SAST, Static Application Security Testing, and SCA, Software Composition Analysis, along with some software quality analysis of your source code. We're a member of the Kiuwan. Kiuwan is a member of the IDE family. You may not recognize the name IDE. They tend to hang out in the database world, but our cousins, there are other children in IDE that you may have heard of, like TestRail and Travis. And then we also work closely with the other IDE members, Assembler, Ranorex, and there is a list of other companies in IDE that we all play well together. Kiuwan, though, is SAST and SCA. So SAST, for those of you that don't know, is Static Application Security Testing. That's where your code, your source code, gets scanned for patterns as defined by reference standards that are known to be poor coding practices or security issues. In the big picture, Kiuwan with our SAST and SCA products live towards the left side of the pipeline. And as you move farther right, then you start to introduce other concepts from different companies for DAST, IAST, and other types of hardening and testing for your software. Kiuwan itself covers some 33 plus languages, software languages, and some, whatever this is, 12 or 13 normative standards, growing as new standards get baked into the ecosystem, and some 25 plus frameworks. And this also grows depending on what's hot in the development markets on any given sprint. When we scan your code with our SAST, we look for, as I said, patterns as defined by normative standards. That actually translates to something more like this. So you may not be intimately familiar with OWASP, NIST, and some of the PCI DSS, all those kind of things, but you probably do know things like injection errors, information leaks, and encryption issues, flow control type vulnerabilities are the things that we search for in your source code and then present you with a dashboard so you can see what those vulnerabilities are and then start to manage them. We also do SCA, Software Composition Analysis, what you might call third-party and open source scanning. So that is stepping through your source code, looking for packages that you've included that may or may not be as strong as you want them to be. They may have pre-existing vulnerabilities or have registered against them hacks and vulnerabilities that would indicate to you that you might want to think about swapping that package out with something that's more secure. As I mentioned, we also we're software developers by nature, about 15 to 20 years of experience in software development, computer scientists by background. So we tend to come to the pipeline from the left side and look at code from a quality point of view. And software quality as defined by ISO 25000 tends to speak in 5 pillars of quality: the portability, maintainability, efficiency, reliability, and security. Security we broke out into its own feature and then augmented it to turn it into SAST and SCA. But when we scan your code, we're actually looking at the code with an expanded eye towards not only security, but quality. From a big picture, high level point of view, what it looks like is the Kiuwan lives in the cloud by choice. And it's a 2-part tool, a web-based portal that displays results that your users can log into and see results come back. The results are generated by running a Java application called Kiuwan Local Analyzer. That Java application can be run in our cloud. You can use our compute to scan your code, but it's better and you leverage more of the KLA power by pulling it on-prem and running it on your domain. That KLA, the Kiuwan Local Analyzer, generates results, uploads it to the results database, then we augment those results and expand on them, combine them with additional information, and then make that available to you. What we're going to be doing today is looking at this portion, this leg here, where I have drawn this as a single unidirectional line from the developers uploading their results to the results database, Kiuwan results database. This is actually a bidirectional line where the developers can, in their IDE, instantiate a plugin that pulls the results back to the IDE, much like this user is doing over here. What we're going to be working on today is showing how to instantiate that or install that Kiuwan IDE plugin into the developer's IDE, Visual Studio in this case, and then pull back some results so you can see how that works. And then start to manage or remediate the results in your IDE without having to go up to the dashboard to pull that information and toggling between views. All that picture, that interaction between the developers and Kiuwan is in this ecosystem that it looks more like a pipeline where you have developers pushing code to a repo, and then Kiuwan either scanning the code in the repo or working with the developers directly and scanning source code on their branch on their desktop. What I'm doing today is scanning a branch that I've pulled code on my laptop that pushes it up to the Kiuwan database and not actually messing with the repo at all. You could, though, fold in scanning at the repo level, which is a different webinar that you can find on our homepage, our Kiuwan.com homepage. All right, so enough of the preamble and the commercial. Today's discussion is about Kiuwan IDE plugin, sometimes called Kiuwan for Developer. Kiuwan actually has multiple free IDE plugins that we provide for the big 3 browser families: Eclipse, JetBrains, and Visual Studio. They're all the same. They all do viewing of data. Eclipse is a little bit different in that it has some power to launch a scan, but all of them view data from that central cloud-based Kiuwan repository. You can read more about what we're doing today, and I'll show you this here in a minute. Our pages for these plugins, all 3 flavors. So as I said, it's a free plugin. All our plugins are free. In this particular case, the plugin for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code is free. When we get through instantiating this, what we'll do is we'll connect to the Kiuwan Cloud repository and pull back the scan results into the IDE, into a pane into the IDE. Most of the information that we're going to be pulling back from the cloud portion into the IDE is what you as Kiuwan users would see on the vulnerabilities page. And I'll show you that here in a minute. The actual recipe for what we're doing is available on our website. And we'll use that segue to go ahead and just toggle over to that. So I've changed channels on you and I've gone to Kiuwan.com. If you go to Kiuwan.com, resources, product documentation. Slow interwebs today. You can search for developer integrations. And you get a list of all of our integrations. And then specifically, hopefully in here you will find integrations that are meaningful to you. If you don't, feel free to contact us and we will see what we can do about actually crafting the integration and documenting that and posting that up there. And then as I had led you to believe, there are a series of pages similar to those for the Kiuwan for Developer or the Kiuwan IDE plugin. Same type of thing. You can find the instructions for JetBrains and Eclipse. Today we're going to be working with the Visual Studio family. Specifically, I'm on a Mac, so the first one we'll start with is Visual Studio Code. And before I do that, I'll take you over here to, this is the Kiuwan dashboard. So if you're a Kiuwan user, you will have seen this before and you will have logged into your account and you will note that these are your applications, whatever. In my case, they're just demo vulnerable apps. And what I've done is I've done a scan of an app, and actually the one I scanned was this one, WebGoat 800M25. And it comes up with some vulnerabilities, so that's good. So this is, if you're using Visual Studio Code, this will be your IDE. And one of the first things you'll do is refer to the product documentation page on the Visual Studio Code. And you can read through this just like I did. And one of the things that this says is that we're going to be downloading this v6 file. And then the summary for this is that we're going to go into Visual Studio Code and add that v6 file to the IDE, and then that will essentially be it for adding Kiuwan to the project. So what that works out to be is that we downloaded the v6 file. So we went over to Kiuwan, downloaded the v6 file, then we went back to our IDE, and you go to Code and Preferences. Settings. And then Extensions. And what we're going to be doing is adding an extension, a Kiuwan extension to this list. So we can do that by going to so to make sure you saw that, Visual Studio Code, go down to the extension, the settings wheel, and add extensions. And then from the triple dot at the top, install the v6 that we just downloaded, either one. And it's added the Kiuwan extension to the Visual Studio Code list of extensions. And then from there, you can modify the settings of Kiuwan. So you can find it in your list over here. Click on the configuration wheel from the extension listed in the list of extensions, and modify its settings. And then that takes you to the settings panel for configuring Kiuwan for developers, the Kiuwan IDE plugin. And from there, you have several options. One, you can configure it for this user, whoever's using this IDE, and you can fine tune it and override the user settings and configure it for a specific workspace, and including adding your username for Kiuwan. So this would be what you logged in with over here, and your password. And then if you're single sign-on, you can fine-tune that, and then you can continue on to modify what values you want to see coming back, if any modifications. Then once you've saved that, then you will note that you've picked up a Kiuwan icon over here. So what Sebas is, I'll pass this over to Sebas, and what he's going to do is show you how, if you have a project that's opened up,
sure, I will
and
do
you
that.
have Kiuwan connected to it, it can pull back results. So let
Sure.
me show that to you.
Great, thanks, JD. So hello everybody, this is Sebas talking. Sorry for my English, I'm Spanish, but come on, we can try. So this is my Kiuwan account, and I can see here my application, Snow Hard Wolf. That is a Golang application. Golang is a new language that I really love. So here we can see some defects, some vulnerabilities in this application that we will try to see in the Visual Studio Code. Let me check the action plans. That you know that in Kiuwan you can define the action plan with just some small number of defects, and it is really more interesting for a developer to see only some small defects, maybe the most important one, because they can put the focus on this action plan. Okay, so let's go to Visual Studio Code. Here is my Visual Studio Code, and I have here my application. The application is the one that you have seen before in the Kiuwan account. It is the Golang application. I have here some Golang files as login, logout, postgo, and you can see here the source code. And after installing the plugin, as JD has said before, we can see here the Kiuwan icon. When I click on the Kiuwan icon, I can see all the defects for this application. In this case, I have selected to see the defects from my action plan, my first action plan for Go language. And I can see here the defects. There is a defect in the line 136, then another one in the line 137, then line 91 and 92. If I click here, I can see exactly the details. I can go to the line where the problem is. In this case, the problem starts in the line 119. So it means in this line here, because I'm getting a password from the user. And then the problem is executed in the line 136, where I am storing the value of this parameter in a cookie. So as you can see all your defects. For example, the next one is it starts in the line 79. Again, I'm getting a mail from a user, and if it is a hacker, then it can damage my application. If I go to the next line, here I can see that I'm again storing the value in a cookie, so it can be dangerous for my application. If I want to know more about this rule, I can check with right button, and here I can see show rule documentation in Kiuwan. And I can see exactly the information where the problem is, just to learn more about these defects. In this case, it is a HTTP response splitting problem, so I can check here the documentation, also related to some security standards, for example, the OWASP one or the PCI or WASP that JD has commented before, some interesting reference, and of course, a violation code that is useful to learn how to fix the problem and the fixed code. Okay. Also, I can play with the filters if I wish. For example, imagine that I have here all the defects, for example, I don't know, maybe more than 100, then I can play with the filter to see only the very high defects, and not to see the high, and not to see the low, only the very high defects. So I can play with that in order to see just the information where I want to put the focus. Okay, that's all from my side, JD, and I've.
Very good. So I appreciate that. So this was Visual Studio Code, and we have been doing the installations for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code from our product pages, right? So the problem here is that there are so many versions of Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code out there, generations, that sometimes the interface changes. The concepts are the same, but sometimes the interface changes. So what I'm going to do is I started up my Windows machine previously and installed Kiuwan IDE plugin into Visual Studio. So on Mac, you saw Visual Studio for Code, Visual Studio Code, and now on Windows, I'm going to do the same thing for Visual Studio. And you'll see that it's very similar. You start up the Visual Studio, go to Tools, and these instructions are outlined in our pages. Click on Options, and then select the Environment menu, and then come down to Extensions. And then from there, you can add a link to external definitions. So in the Visual Studio Code version, we did the V6 file. In Visual Studio, we have once again over here on our documentation pages, we're stepping through the same type of instructions, and for example, in this version of Visual Studio, the menu is parked under this location, and in the version in Windows 10 and Visual Studio 19, it's in a little bit different place, but you still pull the same definition and then add that definition to Visual Studio. You do that by just clicking on the Add button, and then that gives you a new entry, a new container. And then you can go ahead and fine-tune that by giving it a meaningful handle, and then pasting in the URL from our documentation for the Atom file. And then save that off. And then what happens is you end up with an entry in your extensions list that points to a handle that points to the Atom that lists out the coordinates for the tool, for the extension. And then you can go to Manage Extensions, so the main menu Extensions, Manage Extensions, and you should see that the Kiuwan plugin is listed now. Or you can go ahead and sort through the list and pick it out of the long list. Once you get a clean install of the Kiuwan extension, then you can go back to Tools and Options, just like we did over in Visual Studio Code. Collapse the environment menu and go, you should now have an entry for the Kiuwan plugin, IDE plugin, and you can click on that, and then you can do the part that I upset the demo gods and put in your username. And then you can put in an incorrect password a couple of times and then figure out what your real password is and then put that in there. And then you're back to where Sebas was, where once you add all of that, then you'll be presented with a pane that you can open up and then sync that up with your project, and then be back to where you're pulling essentially the items from this list, including some of the details like the file names and the actual line numbers with the issues into your browser so that you can start to sort through those from there. So to recall, what we did was I took you to the Kiuwan product pages, the manuals, and we searched for Kiuwan for developers, and that gives you the information on all the IDEs. You can read up on Eclipse and JetBrains. They're very similar to this. We specifically went into Visual Studio Code, and I added painfully the plugin to my VS Code. And then I took you to a recording of me doing it to my Windows machine and installing it on my Windows Visual Studio. And then somewhere in there, we also had Sebas actually, because he's more functioning than I am, show us how this looks when you're actually working on a given project and jumping to a specific line of code. And that takes us back to the presentation and the final pages. Before I check in with what questions, if any, that we've had, I'd like to remind you that if you have any questions or comments on anything you saw today, you can contact us at this email. You can read more about how to do these integrations and additional Kiuwan functions by going to our blog or going to our resources that are on our website. And then you can always check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and if you want, and keep up to date on the webinars as we release them for the community. So with that, I don't see any questions in the Q&A panel. I'll give Sebas a chance to correct me if he's fielded anything, but from my point of view, it looks pretty quiet. And if you have nothing, Sebas, and no one else has anything, I'll go ahead and wrap it up now, and we'll see everyone in the usual places next time. All right.
There are no. Yes, there are one question. There's one question.
Okay.
Just about JetBrains support. If there are support for the IDs of the JetBrains family. Just the answer is yes. If you go to the Kiuwan documentation, you can see all the JetBrains IDs that are supported. Thanks, JD. Yeah, exactly. Is IntelliJ, PHP Storm, PyCharm, Android Studio, and C Lion if you are a C developer.
And I would use this as a segue. We are developers, so we use standard developer words. Like we have tried our plugin on these IDEs. It is possible they work on others. Just we haven't done an exhaustive installation effort to try and check each and every version and model and make of IDE. We have checked these. So you're safe here, but your mileage actually might be better. You might be able to get it to run on other IDEs. Sebas, I interrupted you. Any others?
Yes. Can you analyze from the ID? I think that you have answered to them during the presentation. There is a special case that is Eclipse, and you can analyze within Eclipse.
So, and to follow on with what Sebas is saying is that for the JetBrains, the Microsoft browsers, we bring the results down, and you can launch the project and go to that line of code. But we don't have a way in those tools to actually initiate a scan from the IDE. If I wanted to scan this project again, I would have to go to my Kiuwan local analyzer or run a script or use CI or some other external actor to start that scan. And then it would get pushed up to Kiuwan Cloud, and then I could refresh my results and I would get the latest scan results back. Eclipse does that, and it has the ability to launch a scan. And as I said, there are existing webinars on our website, including one where Eduardo of our group showed, I think was it Eduardo, who shows how to actually do that, to launch Eclipse, launch a scan from Eclipse. What other questions do you have, Seba?
Yeah, there is another question that is where the analysis happens really, if in the cloud or locally. Just the answer is the analysis are always local. It means that you have the Kiuwan local analyzer, that is a local agent that will run the analysis locally in your machine, in your server, whatever you want. Then the results are uploaded to the cloud. And then from the, exactly, it is the slide. You can download the defects in your favorite ID. Just to do a summary.
Excellent. What other ones? Those are good ones.
Let me check if there are more questions. I think it's all.
All right, very good. All right, well, having said that, if you come up with questions that we did not cover today, feel free to drop us an email and we'll field those. Otherwise, we will process this webinar and you will see a link in your inbox shortly. So you can watch me fuss with passwords later on. If there's nothing else from anyone, I'll wrap this up and say cheers. See you guys in the usual places. Have a good day. Stay safe.